Yes, it's back. We're talking about college football. It's time now for my second annual college football preview show, in which I'll highlight the major conferences in college football and have some BCS busters for you as well. A reminder, we won't be going into the Big 12 on this episode. That's because we're going to have quite a bit on the Big 12 later in August, including 12 separate editions of the Big 12 preview, because we're going to highlight each Big 12 school. We're going to give them their own preview show, and then at the end of the month we'll have Big 12 tidbits, which is a general look at the Big 12. But let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about 2010 college football preview. We'll begin with the SEC. As country music singer George Jones once sang, "There's nothing better once you've had the best." And in the case of the SEC, they've been the best the past 4 seasons, winning the last 4 national championships. Don't get any better than that. Alabama comes in as the #1 team in the country, according to the coaches poll that just came out. The defending national champions will be loaded on offense, including the backfield. Heisman Trophy winning running back Mark Ingram, as well as his running mate Trent Richardson, makes the Tide the best backfield in the country, bar none. Julio Jones returns at wideout, and Greg McElroy is back at quarterback. And they return the bulk of the offensive line. One of the biggest reasons, though, why I'm not picking the Tide to win the national title, they have too many holes to fill on defense. And I know Alabama's loaded with 4 or 5-star players that they could just plug in. But there's no substitute for experience, and they lost a lot of talent, including Rolando McClain at linebacker, Terrence Cody up front, and Javier Arenas, a very dangerous special teams player, as well as defensive back. He's gone as well. The Tide will be good on defense, but not great. The schedule, way too brutal. You're talking about games at home against Florida, October 2nd, at LSU, at Arkansas. You have to host Auburn at the end of the year. A game against Penn State in September is one you can't just sneeze away. And you're looking games at Tennessee and at South Carolina. Plus the majority of Bama's opponents will have a bye week before playing the Tide. So that's an even bigger bullseye on Alabama's back. They'll still win the SEC West, but I can't see them going undefeated. No way. The Auburn Tigers, they are an improving team. Not quite on the same level as Alabama just yet, but you have a veteran offensive line coming back for the Tigers, and they're going to have a new quarterback. So the offense might struggle a bit in the beginning, but look for them to improve as the season goes along. Most of their big games are at home, all except for that game at Alabama at the end of the year. Not quite ready yet to beat the Tide. That game's in Tuscaloosa. Too big of a task for the Tigers. Let's talk about another group of Tigers, LSU. They have a lot of work to do replacing the defensive line. They lost most of their D-line, and that's been an area they've been strong in the 2000s. Les Miles' team, though, will be pretty good in the secondary, but have to replace the backfield. The Tigers have their fair share of talent, but also a nightmarish of a schedule. They start off against a good North Carolina team. They play them in Atlanta, and later in the month have to host West Virginia. Some think the Mountaineers are going to win the Big East Conference. They do get Alabama at home. Unfortunately, LSU has to go to Arkansas, and they have to go to Florida and Auburn as well. Wow, difficult schedule for the Tigers. Arkansas starts off the season ranked 19th in the country for Bobby Petrino's team. Ryan Mallett is back at QB, one of the better QBs in the country. Nothing wrong with Arkansas's offense, but the defense is another story. They were the worst last year in the SEC, and I think that keeps them from being a true contender in the SEC, but they will play spoiler, capable of pulling off an upset or two. Difficult schedule during the middle of the season for the Hogs, playing at Georgia, then hosting Bama, and then playing A&M. A&M, you know, wants another shot at the Hogs after what Arkansas did to them last year in Arlington. Same 2 teams in that stadium this year. And then they close out that rough 4-game stretch at Auburn. So you only get 1 home game in that 4-game stretch. That right there is going to determine if Arkansas is for real or if they're going to be just an 8-win ball club. We'll have to wait and see. If you move now to the SEC East, you're talking about 1 AT. We're talking about the year after Tim Tebow. He's finally moved on to the NFL, but Florida also lost 3 receivers, which I think is just as devastating. But 1 key returner for the Gators, the head coach Urban Meyer, who had retired briefly during the offseason, but he's now back. His health looks like it's going to be good. New quarterback, but they are saying that this guy is an NFL-type quarterback in John Brantley. He may not be able to give you the intangibles of a Tebow, but he has one heck of an arm. And you know with Florida, they simply reload. Defensively, it's going to be solid as well. Even though they lost a couple of key contributors, including Brandon Spikes at linebacker, Florida will still be tough. Their division isn't as tough as the SEC West. Their schedule is not nearly as tough as Alabama's, although they will see the Tide on October 2nd. More on that game in just a minute. The Georgia Bulldogs, if you look at the Bulldogs last year, one of the bigger disappointments in college football, they ended up losing 5 games. They did close out the season winning at Georgia Tech and winning their bowl game just to get to 8-5. The underachieving Dogs have new assistant coaches. Mark Richt has hired some new assistants. We'll see if that helps at all. A.J. Green will need to have another big year from the wideout. He's a junior, but believe me, next year he's going to the NFL. Bank on that. I think Georgia will finish second in the SEC East. They're just simply not as good as Florida. The cocktail party will go to the Gators, and Florida and Alabama. That's my game of the year in the SEC, October 2nd, the same day as Oklahoma, Texas. I think this will be the first of 2 meetings between the 2 teams. I look for Alabama, because of the home field advantage, to win the first game, but the SEC championship 2 months later in Atlanta. I think Florida gets revenge. I think Florida, they're going to win the SEC, but no team in the SEC is going to go undefeated. So no national championship this year for that conference. Time now to talk about the Pacific 10, which will be the Pacific 12 Conference in about a year or 2. USC, though, they're still in the conference, even though they're on probation. Thank you very much, Reggie Bush. It was a turbulent offseason. You now not only have probation, but also you have a new head coach, as Pete Carroll. He's at the Seattle Seahawks. Enter Lane Kiffin, who only coached 1 year at Tennessee, but he brings his assistants as well as his dad with him. Monty Kiffin, who did a good job coaching the defense a year ago. Look for USC's defense, which I thought was pathetic last year, and a big reason why they only went 5-4 in Pac-10 play, to improve. Now remember, USC, their non-league schedule is not very difficult at all. And remember, they also get Oregon and Washington at home, a couple of teams that beat the Trojans last year. But USC, it's going to be tough for them in conference play. They got to go to UCLA, they got to go to Stanford, they got to go to Oregon State, and they have to go to Arizona. Speaking of the Wildcats, Mike Stoops' squad returns plenty on offense, so expect improvement there, but they have to revamp that secondary. That's bad news in a conference that loves to throw the ball. So Arizona, I think they'll finish 3rd place at best, but no higher. Stanford, big loss there. No Heisman runner-up in Toby Gerhart. He's moved on, but Andrew Luck does return at quarterback. We didn't see him in the bowl game last year against Oklahoma because of injury, but he does come back this year for the Cardinal. If you're looking at maybe a contender, how about Oregon? The Ducks, they are going to be loaded in the backfield, and they're going to be loaded on defense, returning nearly everybody. I would have made them the clear-cut favorite in this conference if it weren't for the stupidity of Jeremiah Masoli, their all-everything quarterback, who got in trouble numerous times during the off-season with theft, with traffic tickets, speeding. They had no other choice, did Oregon, to kick him off the team. So Masoli's gone, big void at quarterback. Oregon plays at Southern Cal this year. They also have to play at Oregon State, just to name a couple of those tough games, and they play at Tennessee in September. Oregon State's going to be my dark horse. I think Oregon State, I'm going to go against the grain, and I'm going to say they're going to win the Pac-10. One reason why, I've got several reasons, but first one, Mike Riley is one of the more underrated college coaches in the country. Number 2, the non-league schedule is going to prepare the Beavers. You're talking about games against TCU and Boise State, the 2 best non-BCS schools. Both games are away from home. So even if Oregon State cannot win either game, I still think when it comes to the Pac-10, they'll be more prepared than anybody. Plus, they get Oregon at home. Remember, Oregon State was a game away last year from getting to the Rose Bowl. This is going to be my game of the year in the Pac-10, the Civil War between the Ducks and the Beavers. You're going to see an outstanding ball game. It's going to be high scoring, but the game in Corvallis, I think Oregon State, with Jacquizz Rodgers coming back at running back, an All-American type running back, he returns. Oregon State to make it to their first Rose Bowl since 1965. Okay, time now to discuss the Big Ten. 3 teams to keep your eye on. First of all, Iowa, the Hawkeyes, or some people would call them the Luckeyes, because last year in a lot of games they got lucky. Okay, last year they won several close contests, including non-conference games against teams that were much better than Arkansas State as well as Northern Iowa. Plus they had close calls in conference play. But regardless, they did win 11 ball games. They did get to a BCS game, and they did win the Orange Bowl against Georgia Tech. Iowa returns 8 starters on defense, so it's going to be pretty tough to score points against them, especially in Iowa City. But the offensive line, that's going to be a rebuilding process. They have to almost start from scratch right there. And remember, they can't be relying on luck all the time. They've got to be able to win games and win games in convincing fashion. You win close games so many times, it will eventually come back to haunt you. But they do have a favorable home schedule, playing Penn State, Ohio State, and Wisconsin in Iowa City, but have to go to Arizona in September for a key non-league game. The Wisconsin Badgers, probably the best ground game in the Big Ten. They were #1 last year in total offense, and John Clay is back for the Badgers. He gained over 1,500 yards a year ago for the U of W. Wisconsin last year won 10 ball games, won their bowl game over Miami last year. But the one thing I want to know about Wisconsin, can they beat a team that's little or a lot better than them? Last year they didn't, losing to both Iowa and Ohio State, plus they had that unexpected loss to Northwestern. Wisconsin, again, had a solid year in 2009. Expect big things from them this year. Their non-league schedule is easy, so they should be 4-0 out of league. Unfortunately, they have to play at Michigan State and at Iowa. That hurts, but they do get Wisconsin at home, which will help. Wisconsin, I look for them to maybe be a 10-2 team and at least be in the discussion for BCS Bowl. But they're not as good as Ohio State. The Buckeyes are going to be loaded on both sides of the ball. Last year, we saw that Terrell Pryor at quarterback is more than just a running sensation. He can hurt you with his arm. He certainly hurt Oregon in the Rose Bowl last year with his arm, so he is a multi-dimensional threat. Dan Herron, who's a workhorse, returns at running back, and the bulk of the offensive and defensive lines for Ohio State's back, and that's why I think that Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten, because they're going to win games in the trenches down the stretch, and they have depth as well. The Buckeyes do play Miami in September, but that game's in Columbus, so that should be a win. They have to go to Wisconsin, but they're better than Wisconsin, and I think the game of the year in the Big Ten is Ohio State at Iowa. I look for this to be, just like last year, a pretty competitive game. Ohio State needed overtime last year to beat the Hawkeyes. And that's all about, to me, the progression of Terrell Pryor. If he's having a sensational year, I think they go into Iowa City, and I think that they end up winning the game. But if it looks like the Terrell Pryor of his freshman year, watch out. This one can go either way. You might even give Iowa the edge. But for right now, I think Ohio State wins the game. I think they go unbeaten in the regular season, and I think they'll be playing in Glendale for the national championship.